Today we're going to talk about StorageX 8.0, the analysis portal, and how we can get you to an S3 archive easier and with more intelligence. When you open up the console, what you see here is you see a home screen. The home screen represents the last analysis that you've done, and it's configurable. In this case, I have almost every one of these is set up to be all files. But for file storage savings, I wanted to see what would happen if we archived everything off under 30 days. So I created an analysis of everything that has been accessed in the last 30 days. That represents 14% of the files. If I look at all the files, I can see that there is activity in the last 30 days, but then not again for almost 2 years, and then again after 3 years. In size analysis, I can see a wide variety of everything from 0 to 16K all the way up to 100 meg files. If I look down at the age analysis, I can see all these files were created a long time ago. So it's not like I'm looking at anything recent. The other thing is I can look at type analysis. In type, what we do is we take the outside ring and we put that as the number of files, and the inside ring represents the amount of space that it takes. So in this case, CSVs, which are 144 or 14% of the workload, represent 77% of the space. So obviously we've got some big CSVs out there. In terms of top consumer analysis, I can see that I've got a student who has a lot of files but taking up almost no space. Print, who is taking up a lot of files but again almost no space. Bowie has a lot of files but taking up a little more space, and then this guy named Elvis who has a pretty high file count and taking up most of the space. If I want to start an analysis, what we do is we set it up so that you have a kind of a workflow here. And one thing I wanted to highlight is this 9777, that's the port that we use for our APIs. So everything that we've developed here on the front end is back-ended by APIs into StorageX and its database. So you could set this up on another system. You could do, DevOps kind of connections and those things, and come up with this information and cart it off to another system for analysis any way that you really want to do it. So we set it up for Discover, Analyze, and Archive in a very simple workflow. In Discover, I'll show you the scan that we use. We use this thing called Scan1. If I edit that, in general, right, the name is Scan1. There's nothing too crazy about that. In Storage Resources, we use what's in StorageX in the classic console. So there's my NetApp 7 mode system. I can choose shares, exports, or both. If I wanted to, I could choose multiple systems for this scan. In this case, I just chose the shares. If I search for those, what it will do is enumerate all of the shares that are on that system. In this particular case, we chose test data 1. So now we've got, the chosen share that we want to analyze. If we go to scan options, this is where we choose our data engines. They used to be called replication agents, but since we've added scan capability and the ability to move to S3, we thought Universal Data Engine was a little more fitting. You still have the same choices, automatic, go to a group, or select a specific one. And then finally, where I think this all gets interesting is in tags. What we've done is we've added the ability to put custom tags on these scans. And in this case, we created 3 tags: app, location, and owner. And then we've put values to them called FX, SkyTap, and Shahan. So the idea here is that if I scan multiple things, let's just say with the location SkyTap, and I have a wide variety of scans, I can then do an analyzation based on that tag, so I can pull from multiple sources and get information across my enterprise as opposed to just going scan by scan, right? You have the capability of adding 50 of these. You can add more later as you do archives. For right now, we just chose these 3 because they give you a good idea of what we're capable of doing. After you run it, it tells you that it's completed. It gives you the number of files scanned and the number of bytes scanned. From there, you can move to analyze. And in this particular case, we've set up a few different analyzations. If I look at all files, in all files, what we did here was we chose the data set, and if you remember, it was called Scan 1. I could have chosen the any of the tags that we created before, but in this case, I mean, obviously it was easier just to choose the scan name, so that's what we did. And obviously there's a bunch of different things that we could choose and scan. And then you can choose a query. Now in this case, I don't have a query. So without a query, what it does is it just says, give me the disposition of every file. Let me look at all the metadata in that group. And the reason why I'm doing this is to show you how we can come to a conclusion on what's out there. When you hit report, you can get a variety of report types. The first one that comes up is file savings. But there's no file savings here because we really haven't chosen anything to archive. If I look at activity analysis, we saw this on the front page, right? This is the information that we saw in a slightly more viewable way because it's bigger. But you can see that there was activity in the last 30 days, then nothing for a year, and then nothing until 3 years. If I look at size analysis, right, this is similar to what we saw on the front page. If I go to age analysis, right, this is all the files. And then the top consumers. Now, these top consumers kind of concern me because I know that they're not around anymore. And since they're not around, I think what I want to do is I want to get a report on what's going on in those particular guys and see what I need to do or what to look at for them. So if I come down here, I've created another analysis set. Now, you can do this successively in the same data set. I just chose to make it easy and create 3 progressive ones. I changed the name, right? So this is now the analysis data set name. Here is the data set that I go ahead and call it. And then in query, I have created a query that is the 3 rock stars. And it's pretty simple. It's like Computers 101, right? It's owner contains Elvis, or owner contains Prince, or owner contains Bowie. I can put groups in there. I can put conditions. But for this one, I just wanted to show those 3 guys. When I show those 3 guys, and this is common throughout the tool, anytime you want to pick out one person, like if I wanted to type in Bowie here, I would get all of Bowie's files up. I could export those out, everything that was visible as a CSV, or I could export all the data as a CSV. But I'm really interested in the reports here. In the reports, what I get is I get that this represents 81% of the data. So these 3 rock stars have actually a lot of the data that's out there in this particular share. If I look at the size analysis, I can see I've got a lot of small files. It's basically, it's almost what we saw before, right, minus a couple of files. If I look at the age analysis, all old data. If I look at the top consumer analysis, we see something similar to what we saw before, but now we don't see anything from student, right, because we're only querying on these 3 guys. And then finally, if I go to, well, we've already seen that. If I go to activity analysis, right, I'm still seeing on these 3 guys, there's still something being accessed here. So what I did to find out who's going to those in the last 30 days is I created a most recently accessed query. And that's pretty simply done. I just used the same data set. I gave it a different name. And now what I've done is I've just said scan name is equal to scan 1, same as before. And then I go to query, and in the query I say last access time newer than 30 days. Right? Pretty simple. I called it newest files, which you saw actually on the first screen. Now, I can query anything here. any of the metadata, right? So file name, sys access pass, export, mode, owner, mode bit string, ACLs, creation time, GID, UID if it's NFS, right? Even if it's the sticky bit. So I have a great wide variety of things I can do here. In this particular case, I'm just looking at 30 days. So I get the 30-day data, and if I run the report, it only represents 14% of the data. If I look at the activity analysis, it's going to be everything is going to have been accessed in the last 30 days, which is good. That means it works. And then if I look at age analysis, this data is quite old. If I look at the top consumer analysis now, it's Elvis's files, right? So the files that are owned by Elvis are still being accessed. So clearly I don't want to archive those. So I'm going to set up a different, a slightly more complicated query, and I'm going to set that up to do the final archive. And so what I did was I actually called it final archive. And that query looks like this. Let me show you that. I'll just go right to query. So that query is a little more complicated, but it kind of goes to what we've been talking about. So I have the 3 rock stars, right? I want to get everything that's by them, but I want access time to be older than 365 days, right? That way, I have nothing that's been accessed recently. I'm taking everything that hasn't been accessed in 365 days, and I'm only touching these 3 guys, right? So when I look at it and I look at the data, I can do the same thing here. I can do a sort. I can pick out the users here. I can pick out the file names here if I want. But if I just run a report, I can see how much I'm going to save right away. So I'm actually saving 67% of this particular workload, which is pretty substantial. If I look at an activity analysis, obviously nothing in the last 30 days, everything in a year or more. If I look at an age analysis, it's still all very old data. And top consumer analysis actually is kind of interesting. Elvis has far less files, and the files are very small. Whereas if you notice before, his workload was actually kind of big. So somebody's accessing some of his bigger files, and they're still important. Prince, really no effect on him. Bowie, it turns out a bunch of Bowie's files, but they take up a significant amount of space. And if I look at the types of files, this is pretty interesting here too. I have in the smallest number of files is the MOVs. There are 5 of them, but statistically they represent 100% of the files. Right? So I got some big MOV files that are taking up the majority of the space. Most of the other files are very, very tiny, and I'm ready to move those off. So since I'm ready to move those off, I would go to the next step, which would be archive. If I want to create an archive, this is a listing of my archives, by the way. If I want to create an archive, I can create the archive, and let's do Rockstar Archive. I can pick an object store. In this case, I'm picking Storage Grid. I can do archive options, same thing as before. I choose the data engine that I want to use to actually do the migration. And then I choose an analysis set. Now, if you remember, our analysis set last time was Final Archive. So I put Final Archive in there. What I'm going to get is exactly what I showed you before in terms of data. And what we've done is we've said, here's the scan, right? It's going to be owner, Prince, or Bowie, or Elvis, and we're going to get older than the last 365 days. So I would save that, and then I would move that, and then execute and move that out to my archive. So that ends this part of it. If there are any questions or you want to contact Data Dynamics, it's sales@datdyne.com. Thanks for your time.